spent 7 years watching passengers get sick on cruise ships, and most of the time the buffet was the reason. The cruise line won't tell you which stations are the most dangerous, which foods sit out for hours, or what really happens in that kitchen before the food reaches your plate. Today I'm sharing 12 things I personally refuse to eat at the cruise buffet, and exactly what you should do instead. If you want more insider secrets like this, hit subscribe right now. New cruise tips every week. Let's start with the one that surprises people the most: scrambled eggs at the breakfast buffet. I know, they look perfectly fine sitting there under that heat lamp, fluffy and yellow, exactly what you'd expect. But here's what most passengers don't realize. Those eggs were almost certainly made from a liquid egg product, not fresh cracked eggs, and they were cooked in large batches well before the buffet even opened. By the time you're loading your plate at 8 or 9 in the morning, those eggs might have been sitting in that tray for 45 minutes to an hour. Scrambled eggs are one of the fastest foods to enter the temperature danger zone, that range between 40 and 140 degrees Fahrenheit, where bacteria multiply rapidly. I watched trays sit under heat lamps that weren't maintaining proper temperature, and nobody was checking with a thermometer. The eggs looked fine. They were not fine. On one sailing I worked, we had a cluster of passengers reporting stomach issues on day 2 of a 7-day cruise, and the scrambled egg station was identified as the likely source. The cruise line handled it quietly, and the buffet kept running. If you want eggs at breakfast, go to the made-to-order egg station. Almost every cruise ship has one. You ask for what you want, they cook it fresh right in front of you. It takes 3 minutes and it's infinitely safer. I always went straight there and never once looked at the scrambled egg trays. And if you're over 60 and your stomach is more sensitive than it used to be, this one small choice can make a real difference in how you feel on day 2. It sounds like a minor thing, but I watched enough passengers drag themselves to guest services feeling miserable to know it isn't. Now let's talk about something even more people love: the seafood display. Shrimp cocktail, crab legs, oysters on the half shell, all laid out on a bed of ice looking absolutely beautiful. And I completely understand the appeal. You're on a cruise, you're in the Caribbean or the Mediterranean, and there's a mountain of seafood right in front of you at no extra charge. But here's what I observed over 7 years. That ice melts. The seafood sitting at the bottom of the display, the pieces that were put out first, those are often sitting in a pool of cold water that's getting warmer by the hour. Temperature maintenance at seafood stations was inconsistent at best. I watched staff add fresh ice on top of existing displays rather than replacing the entire tray, which means the bottom layer of shrimp had been sitting there much longer than it appeared, and raw or lightly cooked shellfish like oysters carry a real risk of norovirus, which is already a significant concern on cruise ships, without adding questionable storage conditions into the equation. One passenger, a retired contractor from Texas, had been looking forward to the seafood display all week. He hit it hard on the first sea day, went back twice, and spent the next 2 days in his cabin. He was absolutely convinced it was something else. But I knew exactly what had happened. I'm not saying never eat seafood on a cruise. The specialty restaurants that prepare it fresh to order are a completely different story. I'm saying be very careful at the open buffet display, especially later in the service period. If you arrive when the buffet first opens and the ice is still hard and cold, you're in better shape. If you're going back for seconds 2 hours into service, I'd skip the shellfish entirely. Your digestive system will thank you. Here's one that sounds harmless but caused real problems on ships I worked. Pre-sliced melon and fruit salad. Fruit seems like the safe, healthy choice at a buffet, and most of the time it is. But pre-cut melon, cantaloupe especially, is one of the more commonly overlooked food safety risks in large-scale catering environments. The outer rind of a melon carries bacteria, and when you slice through it, that bacteria transfers to the flesh. Once cut, melon needs to stay cold and needs to be consumed relatively quickly. At a busy cruise buffet, fruit trays are often replenished by adding fresh pieces on top of existing ones, rather than replacing the whole tray. The pieces at the bottom of that bowl might have been sitting at room temperature far longer than they should. One passenger I spoke to, a retired teacher from Ohio, couldn't figure out why she felt ill on day 3 of her cruise. She had been eating healthy, she thought. loading up on fruit every morning. But that fruit salad had been sitting in a warm buffet environment longer than anyone realized. She missed 2 port days because of it. If you want fruit at the buffet, look for whole pieces you can take and peel yourself, or choose berries and grapes that are less susceptible to this issue. And if you see melon that looks slightly wet or soft at the edges, leave it alone. There's always something else to eat. In a moment, I'll tell you about the one station I always warned my own family to avoid completely. And it's not the one most people would guess. But first, let's talk about the carving station. The roast meat carving station looks impressive. There's a large cut of beef or ham or turkey being sliced to order right in front of you, which feels safe because someone is actively handling it. But here's the issue. That same large roast can sit under a heat lamp for the entire 2 or 3 hour buffet service. The outside slices that are carved fresh look and taste great. But as the service goes on and the roast gets smaller, the internal temperature of the remaining meat can drop significantly. Large cuts of meat take a long time to heat all the way through, and they lose that heat from the inside out as the service period extends. I saw roasts being carved well into service that were noticeably cooler at the center. Staff would carve through to the middle, and the meat there was barely lukewarm. One chef I worked alongside shook his head every time he saw it and said the same thing every week. Guests always wait too long to come. If you're going to the carving station, go in the first 30 minutes of service. Get the outer slices that have been exposed to the most heat. And if the meat feels like it's just barely warm rather than genuinely hot when it hits your plate, I'd think twice before eating it. Now let's get to the station I warned my family about every single time they sailed. The sneeze guard salad and cold dressing area. Here's the thing about sneeze guards. They're not as protective as they look. On a busy sea day with hundreds of passengers moving through the buffet line, people reach around them, under them, and across them constantly. I watched passengers sneeze into their elbow and then immediately pick up serving tongs. I watched children touch every item in the salad bar before their parents steered them away. I saw a man drop a serving spoon on the floor, pick it up, and put it back in the bowl without a second thought. The cold dressings in those shared containers are touched by dozens of serving spoons that have also touched dozens of other things. Cross-contamination in the open salad bar area is constant and largely invisible. You can't see it happening, but it never stops. And the problem is worse on sea days, when the ship has nowhere to go and the buffet is packed with bored passengers grazing for hours. If you love salad, go for the pre-portioned individual salads that sometimes come in sealed containers, or load your plate with ingredients and use single-serve dressing packets when available. The open, shared salad bar on a busy cruise ship is one of the highest contact surfaces on the entire vessel. And for passengers over 60 whose immune systems don't respond to illness the same way they did 20 years ago, that matters more than most people want to admit. Let's talk about sushi. Some ships have beautiful sushi stations, and I completely understand why passengers are drawn to them. But sushi on a cruise buffet is a very different product than sushi at a dedicated Japanese restaurant. The rice needs to be kept at a very specific temperature. The fish needs to be prepared and consumed within a narrow time window. At a buffet, those conditions are extremely difficult to maintain consistently across a 3-hour service period. On ships I worked, sushi was often made in large batches earlier in the day. By the time the buffet had been open for an hour, that sushi had been sitting at ambient temperature for significantly longer than most food safety guidelines recommend. The rice alone loses quality rapidly. I never ate the buffet sushi, not once in 7 years. If the ship has a dedicated sushi or Asian specialty restaurant, that's where I'd go. The buffet version carries more risk than it appears, and raw fish is not something you want to gamble with when you're in the middle of the ocean 5 days from the nearest hospital. Here's something that many passengers over 60 specifically need to hear: the soft-serve ice cream machines. I know that sounds almost ridiculous. Ice cream is cold, so how dangerous can it be? The answer is more complicated than most people think. Soft serve is dispensed at a temperature that's soft and scoopable, not fully frozen. If the machine isn't calibrated correctly or the dispensing mechanism hasn't been cleaned and sanitized recently, bacteria can grow in ways that aren't visible to the person using it. Listeria, in particular, survives at refrigerated temperatures and has been linked to soft serve machines in various food service environments over the years. On one ship I worked, the soft serve machine in the poolside area went days between deep cleaning cycles because it was so heavily used, and the cleaning process required taking it offline. The machine looked fine. It just wasn't as clean as it should have been. For passengers with certain health conditions or anyone taking medications that affect immune function, it's worth paying attention. If the machine looks like it hasn't been wiped down recently, or if the soft serve comes out unusually runny, walk past. Now let's talk about the bread and pastry section. Baskets of rolls, croissants, muffins sitting out at the buffet look perfectly fine. And most of the time they are. But on busy days, those baskets are refilled throughout service by adding new items directly on top of older ones. The rolls at the bottom of a basket might have been sitting there since the buffet opened. More importantly, bread baskets at a buffet are handled constantly. People pick up a roll, decide they want a different one, put it back, pick up another. I watched it happen dozens of times every morning. Nobody thinks twice about it because it's bread. But every hand that touches that basket has also touched elevator buttons, handrails, and serving tongs from every other station on the floor. Take a roll from the top of a freshly filled basket when you see staff replenishing them. Otherwise, order from the main dining room where bread comes fresh and untouched to your table. Condiments and shared sauce containers are another thing I always avoided at the buffet. The ketchup bottle that hundreds of people have touched that day. The hot sauce with a communal spoon. The butter dish sitting at room temperature for the entire service period. I watched people dip their already used knife back into the shared butter. I watched people pour sauce directly from a shared bottle onto food they'd partially eaten and then put the bottle back. Use single-serve packets whenever they're available. If you need to use a shared condiment, use a clean serving utensil to transfer it to your plate. It takes 2 extra seconds, and it's a habit worth building on any cruise. One final thing most passengers never think about: dishes and plates that feel damp when you pick them up. On a cruise ship, the dishwashing operation runs continuously at high volume. Plates come straight out of industrial dishwashers and go directly to the buffet line. If they haven't dried completely, that moisture is sitting on a surface that should be fully dry before food touches it. A wet surface isn't necessarily contaminated, but it's a sign the drying cycle wasn't complete or the plates were stacked too quickly. I always checked my plate and utensils before using them. A damp fork or a plate with fresh water pooling in the center takes 5 seconds to swap out. When you're trying to avoid the one thing that could ruin your vacation, 5 seconds is worth it. The buffet is not a place to be feared. Most meals there are perfectly safe, and millions of people cruise every year without any issues at all. But a buffet serving thousands of passengers across multiple service hours has more variables than any restaurant cooking for a small dining room. Think of it this way: the buffet is a convenience. The main dining room is where the food is freshest, most carefully handled, and prepared closest to the time you eat it. Use both, but use them wisely. When you go early, choose made-to-order options when you can. Watch for food that's been sitting too long, and pay attention to the small signals around temperature and handling. You dramatically reduce your chances of spending a day of your cruise feeling sick in your cabin. You paid for every single day of this vacation. Make sure you feel well enough to enjoy every single one of them. Like and subscribe for more insider cruise secrets every week.